Hello and welcome to TBI's Share the Light podcast series. I am Jody Sanders. I'm a lay leader here at TBI, which basically means I have no qualifications whatsoever to lead religious life here at the synagogue, except that I am Jewish and was willing to get voted on the board. I do have some business experience, though. I've been a senior executive in the past in many different industries, an executive coach in both the public and private sector, and a lecturer and a keynote speaker. So whilst you've probably never heard of me, I have always had a passion for all things theater, and pre-COVID was even performing, directing, and writing in some amateur theater here in Victoria, and was most recently even in a Zoom play. In Zoom. Everything is on Zoom. You might notice my accent is not originally from around here, but like many other multicultural Australians, I moved here in 2003, and 18 years later still call Australia home. Speaking of multicultural Victoria, special shout out to the Multicultural Affairs team in Victoria, Department of Premier and Cabinet, who approved the grant that is allowing us to share the light this Jewish Festival of Hanukkah with all of you listeners and possibly viewers out there. To help us understand the Jewish Festival of Hanukkah and the concept behind Share the Light, today we have with us Senior Rabbi Gersh Lazarow from TBI. Welcome, Rabbi.
Thanks very much, Jody. It's so great to be here on my bima, but with you. It is really lovely. And I should say, you gave all of your credentials, all of your background, your bio, not all of it, but a lot of it. But you left out amongst your theatrical achievements, multiple appearances in the TBI Purim Spiel.
Which, of course, are my favorite.
But you might remember me from past spills such as
Haman. She did.
But it's great to be with you. And it's great that we were able to celebrate Hanukkah in this way, share a little bit of our community with the rest of our neighbours and friends in Victoria. It really is a wonderful thing to be able to do after such a year that has been so filled with darkness, to be able to do as the name of this festival says in and of itself, just to share some brightness, to share some light, send some hope with those that have had a challenging year.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Well, to start to give some insight, and no better person to do that, I think we should start really basic and go with, what is a rabbi?
That is pretty basic, but it's also really hard. And like any great Jewish question, it has multiple answers. And if you were to ask 10 rabbis that same question, and I think over the series you might ask almost 10 rabbis that question, I imagine you might get 11 different answers. By translation, a rabbi is a teacher. And in Pirkei Avot, in Ethics of Our Fathers, we're taught that we should find ourselves a teacher in life, a guide, a mentor, and with that gain a lifelong friend. And so the role of the rabbi is to guide, to teach, but also to simply be in relationship, to be a friend to the community, and support them in moments of celebration, in moments of difficulty, and all the moments that fall between. I can also tell you what a rabbi is not.
Okay.
Unlike some of the faith leaders in other traditions, we are not a sacrament. We are no more holy or special than any other member of the community. And our community, not just because we are a progressive synagogue within the liberal Jewish tradition or the Reformed Jewish tradition, within Jewish tradition, we as a whole and throughout the centuries have very much felt strongly that all community are equal. And whilst I might have the title of rabbi, or in this case, senior rabbi at Temple Beth Israel, my voice is no louder and no more right or righteous than any other member of the community. So we sit here celebrating this festival as a lay leader and a professional clergy person, but we sit here as equals.
Beautifully put. And is that something that's unique in Judaism and in Jewish practice, that the person who's the professional leader is not considered a sacrament, or is that?
I don't think it's unique to Judaism, but it has very much shaped and changed Judaism as we know it as a modern faith. But it's something which people sometimes from outside the Jewish community find surprising, because particularly within the faith communities, many find their introduction to Jewish culture, history, and heritage through the Bible, what we call the Tanakh, what others call the Old Testament. And within that, there is a religious caste system which outlines the roles of the priests, of the Levites, and of the Amcha, the Israeli. What many might not know is while in certain parts of the community, those honorific titles of being a Kohen, a priest, or a Levi, one of the Leviim, is still observed in an honorific form. The rights and responsibilities of the priesthood have all been left in antiquity. Okay. And so without a temple with the Holy of Holies and sacrifices and all of those things that belong to what I describe as the temple cultic period of Jewish history, the pre-rabbinic period, we've let go of all of those things, or many of them, if not all of them, but we haven't really told our neighbors and friends.
Right. Well, more the reason to share the light. I'm just putting that out there.
Absolutely. So if you read the good book,
yeah,
you might say, am I a priest? As in the form of the priests of the Bible. And right. I'm neither a priest, a Kohen, by familial descent, because yes. I don't have that, what we call in Yiddish, yichus. I don't have that family line.
Right. So you chose to be a rabbi, very clearly.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it wasn't a calling to you in a sense. It was a choice that you chose to make.
Like many in my field, as modern rabbis, and particularly within the progressive community, I was called into the rabbinate, into service and education. But this is not a role that was passed down from generations. I'm not a rabbi because my father was a rabbi. My father's a pharmacist. And a damn good one. And he served community in other ways.
That's right.
Throughout his professional life, as my mother does, who works in the travel industry, of blessed memory in 2020. Yeah. But please God, it'll come back
exactly.
strong. But I found my way here in this form. And I actually found my way here not in the form of being a service leader in terms of the religious practitioner leading ritual and liturgy. I actually got into this to be a rabbi, a teacher.
Right.
And by inclination and by training, an educator. I never envisaged being the leader of an extraordinary community such as this with the responsibilities and job description that come with it.
Let's talk about that for a minute. Actually, just the training part. What does it take to become a rabbi?
Again, it differs in different communities, but the clergy who work with us here at TBI, who are part of our Rabbinic and Cantorial Association, are all graduates of recognized rabbinical seminaries. Yeah. And in my case, I'm a graduate of Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, which is a global seminary that dates back to yeshivot, religious study centers of Europe. And as the communities moved, they moved. Right. With the communities. They had campuses and outflows, and is now an institute, a college institute that has campuses in Jerusalem, Los Angeles, New York, and believe it or not, of all places, Cincinnati, Ohio.
Cincinnati.
The Jerusalem of the Midwest.
That's hilarious. I'll tell my family. So how many years does it take to become a rabbi? Like how much study is there?
So rabbinical school's grad school
right.
in those terms.
So you did a bachelor's?
You have an undergraduate degree in ideally a related field.
What was yours in?
I have a BA in Jewish civilization with a minor in Egyptology.
Nice. Similarly related then.
Similarly related fields.
And you thought, what will I do with that degree?
Well, I planned on being a history teacher.
Right, okay.
I enrolled in that course not to become a rabbi.
But to be a history teacher?
Yeah.
For a love of history?
A love of history and wanting to be in the classroom, and I'd actively been involved in our youth group Netzer, and I loved working with youth and that sort of engagement. And I'd spent some time in law school and realized that I really didn't want to be a lawyer. And I trained to become a teacher, qualified, worked as a teacher, and then transitioned into rabbinic studies.
And so how many years was that after? When you say, is that another, how many years?
It's another 5 years at minimum.
Exactly. So it's a lot of work.
5 years of grad school. In my case, I took the 6-year path because Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion also has an outstanding education program. So I extended for a year to complete a master's in education.
So not for the faint-hearted. It's something you really feel passionate about doing.
Oh yeah, it's a massive commitment to engage in this sort of study, but when you do it, it's also an eye-opening experience. I arrived at the first day of my rabbinic studies in Jerusalem with the naive perception that my class would be filled with people, men and women, who had similar backgrounds as well as similar goals, professional goals, as I do. And on the very first day, I remember the Rosh Yeshiva, the dean of the seminary, explained that, while it doesn't break down numerically evenly, in rough terms, when we look to our left and right, a third of the people sitting alongside of us were there, like me, because they were going to vocational school. I wanted to train to become a rabbi.
Yeah.
There were a third who were there because they were going to seminary, who were coming there to study in seminary, as is common in many faith traditions, to deepen their own personal knowledge of their faith tradition and their personal practice.
Yes.
And there were a third there who were going to graduate school.
In Israel.
Well, they were going to graduate school because they had a BA, they were now doing a rabbinic, an MA, or a couple of MAs, and most of them were going to go on to do PhDs, further study, teaching, academic teaching, publishing, and the like. And to be honest, as I moved through my studies and we moved to different campuses along the way, really got a sense of the fact that our community is extraordinarily well served by the fact that its rabbinic leadership, and that's only part of the leadership of our community, is really made up of a diverse group of people who approach their rabbinates in different ways and have their rabbinates framed in different forms.
It's fascinating. I asked Rabbi Levi, and we'll see him in a later episode, a little bit about, he started being a rabbi in 1960.
Yeah, this year's the 60th anniversary of his rabbinate, his ordination.
Amazing, right? And I was asking him what he thought the difference is in being a rabbi in the 1960s and being a rabbi in the year 2020.
Did he say Twitter?
The technology did have a part, but I'd like to ask you the same question. What do you think, particularly over the last sort of 60 years, what has changed? What's different? What do you face today as a modern rabbi that perhaps is different than would have been 60 years ago?
I think there is as much different as there is the same. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I love about our biblical tradition, our scriptural teachings, is that even in these stories which are 2,000 and 3,000 and 4,000 years old, we're able to see the human enterprise in a way that reflects our world. Our world is so remarkably different. We're unpacking at the moment Jacob and his families and their struggles. This week and next week, as we move into Hanukkah, we'll have Joseph and his dreaming and the things, you know that from the musical world.
Yes.
That's where you studied Torah.
Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. I may have even been in the musical.
I
was.
So we see that, we have that as we're able to still apply those ancient stories to our lives today, and that hasn't changed. We're able to look this week, for example, where we observed International Women's Day, something which I'm sure Rabbi Levi wasn't doing in 1960.
That's right.
Not in the same way as we do this week. And our awareness of those issues and the importance of something like International Women's Day, which recognizes that the equality and egalitarianism, which is at the core of our values, is not universally accepted or universally available to all women. And then in that same week, we have a troubling story in our Torah reading of the molestation, the rape of Dinah, one of Jacob's 12 children. And we see the way that her family, her brothers, her siblings responded. And we realize that the plight of women in our society today is something that our tradition spoke about and agitated about 3,000 years ago. So my rabbinate is entirely different. But I do the exact same thing that John did, and that John does, is I take our ancient tradition, the values, practices, and lessons of it, and make it as accessible as possible to the current generation who I have the privilege of serving and working before. There's a sign that sits above many arcs in synagogues. In my case, it sits above my door of my office, which says in Hebrew, "Da lifnei mi ata omed," know before who you stand. And it sits above the ark in the sanctuaries of many synagogues because it's a reminder of when we stand in prayer, we stand before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One. In my case, I put it in my office to remind me that I stand before Jews of the 21st century in 2020. And we need to be relevant and accessible, and we shouldn't fool ourselves about who we stand and who we serve. And that's a constant driver and reminder of purpose. And that means there are lots of things that I do differently. Because, we're recording a podcast.
Exactly.
We have an interactive website. I spend a lot of time working in social media. We through COVID crisis, found new ways to engage, but we also found new people with whom to engage. People that didn't have a synagogue down their throat and have been joining us virtually ever since.
Even from other parts of the world.
Absolutely.
Which has been amazing.
And you know, we're no longer a suburban congregation. We're not even a regional congregational community. We serve our time zone.
That's it.
Which is, you know, an hour to the left of us and an hour to the right of us and down to Antarctica and as far north as we want to go.
That's right.
That's the different part of our rabbinate. You know, John took a boat to go to rabbinical school.
Yeah, he mentioned.
I came home 3 times for my first year.
Isn't that remarkable? And you know, he talked about that when he needed to write to people, he would write in airmail paper, and you know, you can hop on Zoom and talk to anybody anywhere now, which is remarkable.
Yeah, we spoke about a celebration we had in the congregation just recently, where, again, and this speaks to the nature of the notion of Jewish diaspora and multiculturalism. You weren't born in this community, nor for the matter was I. I'm a migrant. I'm a first-generation Australian myself too.
And where have you come from?
I was born in Cape Town, South Africa, and migrated here with my family in the mid-80s. I had the privilege to be educated here and to grow up here, and undoubtedly support the Wallabies and the Australian cricket team, and have no mixed loyalties in the slightest. But I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunities that this very lucky country has given me and my family, and find it incredible that I serve this community. But we had a celebration of a family that arrived here far more recently than you or I. They've only been in Australia 18 months, and they came from Argentina, and for half of those 18 months, they were in lockdown in their home.
Oh, gosh.
The Argentinian Jewish community has been a story of diasporas upon diasporas. They're a relatively young community, in many cases post-war, World War II community, but because of the economic crisis in South America, my generation and those younger have needed to explore options outside of Argentina. And so we had a bar mitzvah boy who was born in Argentina, whose parents are Argentinian, who had a aunt who had met a New Yorker and was in New York.
Right.
Had an uncle who had made Aliyah to Israel and was living in Haifa. I had another uncle who was still in Argentina finishing his studies, and had grandparents who, as a result of, in part, the economic crisis, had moved to Ecuador, to retire to Ecuador, where there was a cost of living that was more accessible and a safety and security that made felt comfortable for them. This young man got called to the Torah in this congregation. And because of the technology that's available, his grandparents and his aunts and uncles stood alongside of him.
Oh,
So that's not even the same time zone.
it's gorgeous.
That's 6 time zones.
That's amazing. That is amazing.
That's the world we live in.
Well, it certainly adds a new definition to progressive Judaism, doesn't it? And in that, actually, I would ask you to explain to our listeners who don't understand the differences of what is a progressive Jew? Is that different than a conservative or Orthodox or Reform?
So again, there are multiple answers to that question. And each of my colleagues who are being part of this podcast celebration of demystifying community will answer it differently. I'll answer it in this way. A progressive Jew is a philosophical position from someone who identifies as a religious or practicing Jew. And it is one of the philosophical or theological positions you might choose to make. Very few people will give you that answer. Okay. Because most people will tell you it means that you go to a progressive synagogue.
Right.
But the problem with saying it means that I go to a progressive synagogue, where we have egalitarian seating and abilities to use technology in the way that we are right now, and a modern reading of text and traditions. The problem with saying that it's about the place is I know so many people in my community, in my own family, who go to an Orthodox synagogue because that's where their parents and grandparents went. It's where I had my bar mitzvah. I didn't grow up as a progressive community. But share our theological position. So with that very big caveat, saying that your that progressive Judaism theologically has very little to do with the synagogue with whom you're affiliated or not affiliated, the synagogue to which you go or don't go, but rather has to do with a theological position. And the easiest way for me to express that theological position, and I'm sorry if this oversimplifies things, but I spent a lot of time teaching primary school. If you believe that the entirety of Jewish law, both written and oral, the Torah Shebiktav and the Torah Shebal Peh, the Talmud and the Torah, were given by God to a historical figure named Moses in a geographical place called Sinai at a date set down by tradition. If that is a historical fact in your world, then you are an Orthodox Jew. Because you take our narrative, our biblical narrative, literally, and as such, you choose to, but you have to take the rules and regulations that come within that as being fixed. You see religious law as being binding.
And therefore things are ritualistic, the way that you practice and the things
Well,
that you do.
you're bound to a fixed practice.
Right.
I don't believe that Moses was a historical figure that stood in a geographical place and
the specific date and time.
at a specific date and time and got given the exact words as they have manifest to us and been passed down to us to generation. I don't question Moses as a figure. It's an important figure in my life, in my theology, in my practice. But I believe, and particularly when I read the texts and I see the editorial hand in our biblical text, that's the historian in me.
Yeah.
I believe that it has been passed down orally, has been colored by generations of people, men and women, mostly men, but men and women such as you and I. And therefore, because I don't see it as being fact, but rather choose to connect to it as a story of faith, in the same way as the first peoples of this beautiful country of ours speak about their dreaming. I look at Genesis, particularly the stories of Genesis, as being our dreaming.
Great analogy.
And because of that, I have religious law manifest in my life as being guiding. So I distinguish it as if you think that Moses stood on the mountain and got the 10 Commandments like you saw in the movie,
Yeah.
that's historical fact. You're an Orthodox Jew and you see religious law as being binding. If you see it as being a metaphor or a myth, and see the passing down of text as being generation's best effort to reflect the divine spirit, I don't question revelation, we are able to therefore identify as being a progressive Jew and see religious law as being guiding. That's a great gift for me because it allows me to have different positions on things, particularly, for example, matters recently such as marriage equality or how we respond to environmental issues or social consciousness, because I don't have to respond to that from a religious fundamentalist perspective. I can be modern, I can be current, and I don't have to give up my faith.
It's wonderful, wonderful. And so if you were to think about explaining exactly what being Jewish really means, and this is a question just for you, not anyone else, but you are our senior rabbi, our senior teacher here. If you were to explain what being Jewish actually is, what would you say it is? For our multi-faith listeners, of course.
Judaism is a living tradition. And in our tradition, we have a number of expressions of that. Perhaps best characterized by the dictum nilmad v'na'aseh. We will learn and we will do. Because learning for learning's sake, that's just indulgent. But being able to learn, to apply that learning to make a difference to ourselves, to our family, to our community, to our world, that's what we've always done throughout the centuries. So I would say that Judaism is a lens through which to see the world with an understanding that through that sight there becomes responsibility. And that responsibility is to make the world as good and as beautiful a place as complete, as whole a place as possible.
That's beautiful. And I suppose, everything that we do, whether it's big or small, even a podcast about sharing the light and trying to demystify Judaism and helping to explain to others so that we can create closer connections to bring people in as much as we also want to go out and learn. That's a special part, I suppose, of...
Absolutely. And Jody, I think there's a powerful story told, attributed to Isaac Luria, who was a great medieval thinker, a mystic. And as you know, I like stories because they're parables are a wonderful way of helping us think through our lives and the world in which we live. And Luria explains both the notion of creation as well as revelation and our purpose within it through a telling of a story of the creation of a vase. God as the potter. You've probably heard metaphors of God as a watchmaker or different applications for what God might be, how God works in our world. Well, this is God as the potter. And God makes this perfect throws on a wheel, I imagine. Luria doesn't describe it this way, but in my mind's eye, I see this potter working a wheel, making this vase or this urn. And it's exquisite. It's the most perfect thing you've ever seen. It doesn't have a single flaw in it at all. That, Luria says, is creation. That's the world God created. And then into this vessel, God places us, God's other creation, humanity. except we're not as perfect as the vase. And we can't manage this perfect world with our imperfect selves. And so the vase, through our action or inaction as it may be, shatters and breaks. And the world as we know it, Luria teaches, is us living on those broken shards of the God's first creation. And what is our purpose? Our purpose is to engage in the process of tikkun. As an American, you probably heard about tikkun olam. Well, tikkun olam means repairing the world.
Right.
But where tikkun first got introduced is just this notion of repair. What is it we're repairing? We're repairing the vase. And how are we repairing it? We're finding the edges of each shard, like a puzzle, how they match up, and bringing them together. That includes getting to know our neighbors, as well as those across town and across the world who see the world very differently to how we do. And as we bring their shard close to ours and bring them back together again, we refine ourselves, we make ourselves better people, better neighbors, better citizens, better husbands, better wives, better children. We repair ourselves. But it's a series of repairs that exist as concentric circles. Just as we repair ourselves, we're repairing our community. And then our community, which is made up of people repairing themselves, is part of a society which is made up of communities of people who are repairing themselves. And that society, those societies come together to form a nation. And those global nations, imagine a world where global nations were actually made up of communities and societies that were dedicated to individual self-actualization and realization. Imagine.
Yeah.
Then those nations,
be brilliant.
Those nations would be able to actually bring each other together. And what will happen at the end of that process? This is what others describe as the Messianic age. No, I don't wait for a Messiah to come and do this. It begins with me and you chatting about how we can be our best selves.
Yeah.
What happens is, I imagine a day where that vase will be brought back together through the actions and partnership of humanity working in conjunction with the divine spirit. And I believe fundamentally, as Isaac Luria believed, that repaired vase, that realized world, will ultimately be more beautiful, more textured, more colorful, almost like the when a treasured family item develops a certain color and texture to it. It's more beautiful tarnished than it is new, because it tells a story.
The history of it, exactly.
I imagine that that's what our world will be. And that's why I get up every single day.
That's fantastic.
That's what I think Judaism's about. You're the first person in a long time to have asked me that.
Well, it was a gift to be able to hear your answer, so thank you for that. And very special.
Too busy working spreadsheets and the other parts of my job as a senior rabbi.
So see, getting to share the light and being here, this is wonderful. It's a good break for you. And so to talk a little bit about the Festival of Hanukkah, which is exactly the festival we're celebrating, perhaps you'd also be great to explain what is Hanukkah and why does it go for 8 days?
I'm probably not the best person to explain that.
Okay.
Because
May I save that for somebody else?
No. I'll answer it. But at this point, I'll ask everyone to go to sharethelight.org.au and click on the button that says history and hear the story of Hanukkah as it has been told through generations.
Oh, there's a good shameless plug then.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And as rabbi, I will tell the story as it's been told through generations, as is articulated in tradition. What's interesting is the book of Maccabees, which tells the great story of Hanukkah, is actually not in the Hebrew Bible.
Right.
Maccabees 1 and Maccabees 2, which is found in the Christian Bible, is part of a section of the text called the Apocrypha, which is texts that were traditionally attributed to Jewish voices and Jewish audiences, but didn't make it through the editorial process that created the Tanakh. And
they didn't think the story would be big later on, or?
No, they knew it would be big.
Right, so it needed a separate place.
Well, they were living under Roman occupation and Roman demand, and they thought perhaps having a story about a small group of people who started a civil war and ultimately believed so much in their calling that they overcame a great nation. Now the story of the Maccabees is about Judah Maccabee and the Greeks.
Yes.
15 generations before the Roman Empire. But I think the rabbis understood that perhaps it wouldn't be wise
to brag about all
to
that?
be putting into our good book a story about the fact that we're planning on when they were really living on the precipice. And it's those sort of pragmatic decisions made by generations before us, which I think are fabulous. They make me smile with a warmth and a love, because they were prepared to essentially bench one of their great stories,
right,
to ensure that they could live long enough to tell it. And so that's in part what the story of Hanukkah is about, the Maccabees' a revolt against the Greeks. The festival itself means, Hanukkah means rededication, because at the end of that miraculous victory, they committed to rededicating the temple. Yes. There is a story about the rekindling of the Menorah, the seven-branch candelabra that sat in the Holy of Holies, and that they needed to light that menorah. And unfortunately, there wasn't enough oil to light it, to keep it lit perpetually, which is what it meant to be doing. And so rather than waiting for oil to be found and sourced and brought, they decided that they were going to do it with the limited oil that they had. Mm. But miraculously, that oil, where it should have only burned for one day, as the story goes, burned for 8 days, applying sufficient time for
more oil to get there?
To be made. This is when I say that I'm the wrong person to ask what the Festival of Hanukkah is, because the historian in me knows very clearly, having studied the book of Maccabees, actually with my non-Jewish colleagues and friends, as part of our common narrative. I know that there's, in the book of Maccabees, an extraordinary speech attributed to Judah Maccabee, the leader, where he speaks about, he's trying to rouse his troops. And he says, victory is imminent. Don't give up now. Take your garlands and your fragrant fruit, your garland wands and your fragrant fruits with you, and we will soon be in Jerusalem. As the rabbi studying that, I'm like, oh, you're talking about the lulav and the etrog of the Festival of Sukkot,
yeah,
which puts us in the exact place in the calendar. There's no question that this is a historical event that happened. And what did he promise? He goes, you can't celebrate Sukkot right now because we're in the middle of a battle. You can't do this holiday the way you've always done it. But hold on to the things, because we'll get a chance soon. 2.5 months later, 3 months later, they get to Jerusalem, they're successful. He keeps his promise. He declares an 8-day festival. By the way, that's how long Sukkot is.
Right.
An 8-day festival as a public holiday, because I promised it to you, soldiers. Go do what you would have done during the harvest festival. Eat, drink, be merry. Once you give people an 8-day public holiday,
you
can't take it away. We found that with the football, the grand final Friday.
That's right. Even in lockdown, we're keeping it.
And so what you find, which is this beautiful story, is the next year they want their 8-day public holiday. And the year after, they want their 8-day public holiday. And they celebrate it with Hallel Psalms. We also do that at Sukkot. And they celebrate it with this reading and that reading. And suddenly the historian, the theologian, but the historian in me is like, there's something fishy happening here.
But and nothing like a story to get in the way of a good holiday.
And then surprise, surprise, the rabbis found
the oil
300 years later a written down testimony of the story of the oil. And ever since then, we've celebrated both the military miracle and the divine military of the oil. And the rabbis in our spiritual hearts have been able to live with the fact that this is really a civic holiday, right, not necessarily a religious one.
I think you were the perfect person to
why
explain
let the
all
truth
that.
get in the way of a good story?
I think that was amazing. and that actually leads me to my next question, particularly for our non-Jewish listeners. Is Hanukkah celebrated the same day every year?
Absolutely.
In what calendar?
25th of Kislev, every year.
And explain the difference in the calendars, because I don't know, does everybody understand that, we follow, as Jews, a different calendar than...
I don't think Jews understand.
No, I don't either. So maybe you can...
So where we start is the biggest piece, and excuse me if I use you as
No, go on.
my typical Jew sitting in front of me.
Hey,
What day of the week in the secular calendar is Shabbat?
it starts on Friday night and then goes to Saturday.
And every Jewish holiday you've ever been to,
Starts the night before,
do you understand why?
because of the day and night thing that God started and created at night, and then in the morning.
That's lovely. We run a lunar calendar.
Right.
So days start when we see the new moon.
Yes, of course, that
And
makes
we've,
sense.
like the Chinese people and Chinese culture, we've run a lunar calendar for 4,000 years.
Right.
And the lunar cycle, unlike our crazy Gregorian calendar, which is insane, beautifully created, and our world lives around it, and that's not going to change, but it's not particularly logical.
And
the
there's
Gregorian-
a leap year, leap day,
Well,
leap
so
year.
the lunar calendar is perfectly consistent. And each of the months runs through a full cycle. And 2 lunar cycles is a month, which means that we have 28-day months. And that doesn't exactly work. And so, like most ancient peoples, every 4 years, we have a leap year
Because of the math catching up.
because of the catching up in terms
Yeah.
of the cycles. But we deal with that leap year rather than by adding one day every 4 years, by adding an entire month.
Right.
So Hanukkah is always on time. It's on the 25th of Kislev. Sometimes the 25th of Kislev is at the start of December. Sometimes the 25th of Kislev is at the end of December, and why it's so often associated with Christmas. And people feel that there's a crossover in terms of these observances. And sometimes, like this year, it's in the middle of December.
Right.
It all depends on where we are in our 4-year lunar cycle.
A few years ago, as an American, I remember it was actually in November, and the only reason I remember that is because it was on Thanksgiving, and there was all Thanksgiving cuz that was happening.
It's remarkably rare, but entirely possible.
Right.
That it could fall. Again, Thanksgiving's not a date; it's a day in the week, in the weeks in the month.
Right.
So if Thanksgiving falls late enough in November, because of the way that the calendar works, the Gregorian calendar, and Hanukkah falls early enough,
They collide.
they overlap. But that would be very, very, very rare.
Yeah.
Enough to leave a lasting memory.
Exactly. Well, I think it was, I'll get it wrong, but it is once in lots of generations that it's going to happen.
More than a blue moon.
Yeah, something to that effect. Now, just to talk about some of the things that we use at Hanukkah, and you mentioned a menorah before. Now, is it a menorah or is it a Hanukkah? Why do we call it that? How many arms does it have? Maybe you can share that.
I don't believe it has any arms.
Arms.
It might have branches.
Branches. There we are.
But,
Silly Wikipedia.
The Chanukiah is the symbol of the Festival of Hanukkah. And it is the ritual item that is used to tell that wonderful rabbinic story of the miracle of the oil. The oil that should have burnt for 1 night, but rather burnt for 8. And therefore the Chanukiah, or what some people call the Hanukkah menorah, has 8 branches on the same plane.
Yeah.
They're all at the same level because each of those days are equally important as each other.
All partying on.
And a 9th branch that sets aside, which is used for the helper candle, the shamas, or the light that's used to light it. So the short answer to your question is the Hanukkah menorah is a 9-branched candelabra.
Yes.
And it is distinct and juxtaposed from the menorah itself, which is a biblical ritual item, first created during the Israelite wandering through the desert and held within the Mishkan, the tabernacle. And that is a 7-branched candelabra that represents well, in many ways, the number 7 is very significant in Judaism. That's another whole podcast.
Yes.
But is a 7-branched candelabra, and the menorah through the tabernacle or the Mishkan in the desert, and then the temple, first and second temples which succeeded it, burnt as a perpetual light. So all 7 of those branches constantly burnt, much like the menorah, the 7-branched perpetual light we have in the synagogue at TBI.
And so how do you light the Hanukkah menorah? How do we do it? You don't light them all at the same time?
So you, again,
for our non-Jewish listeners.
the Hanukkah menorah is lit traditionally with 1 candle a day. Those candles are put in from left to right, or I want to say right to left, and then lit the other way.
Right.
Yeah, put in from left to put in from right to left, and lit from right, so that you light the new candle for that day first. So, for example, if you have 3 candles in the candelabra, you light the 3rd candle.
Really,
first
I've been doing it wrong.
to celebrate that day, and then go back to each of the days. There is a minority position which is gaining increasingly in popularity, which actually has the reverse. Begin Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, by lighting all of them. And then each day as you move through the festival, remove a light.
Okay, I hadn't heard that one.
As a way of appreciating the transition of time and getting back to a normal time. As I said, it's an increasingly popular tradition. I don't know one that I'll ever see happen in my house, I don't believe.
No, and I must admit, I always remember, and I could be completely wrong in this, that you lit the menorah the way you read Hebrew. So that's how I sort of always tried to remember it, that you'd have that as a thing. And then just one more Hanukkah question before we go into the corny candle questions, which are coming.
I'm just letting you know that I've been so confused, I've confused and confuddled myself, that I'm doing what I'm recommending everyone does, which is log on again to sharethelight.org.au. And as you move through the various resources that we've developed and shared with both the Jewish community and our wider friends, under Share the Resources, if you click on the Hanukkah Blessings button, which is a beautiful image of a fully lit Chanukiah, you'll see that there's a full explanation of the instructions of what it is, where it came from, and how to light it. And the very first sentence there under step 1, which I wrote, and I'm clarifying for all of our listening and watching audience right now, is step 1. The candles are added to the Chanukiah from right to left.
Right to left, okay, yeah.
As they would be seen from the window. Because the number 1 mitzvah, obligation of Hanukkah, is to publicize the miracle, which is why we're doing this whole festival.
Exactly.
And that's most typically done by putting the Chanukiah in the window so your friends, family, and neighbors could know, hey, it's the 3rd night of Hanukkah. And then when you kindle it, you use the helper candle, but you light the first day and then move across. The day that you're on and then move across.
So now here's a question. Does it have to be candles, or can you use like little electric light bulbs, or, you know, they have little LED lights now? Does it have to be an actual flame?
I think that the correct answer would be say that the blessing is Lahadlik Ner Shel Hanukkah, to light the candles of Hanukkah. But I'm a progressive rabbi, and I'm about sharing the light and I know that when my family was traveling a number of years ago over Hanukkah, we couldn't travel with the matches and the candles and the light and the like, and so we took those little fake battery-operated tea lights. Yeah. And we just turned a different one on each night and left it all night in the window of the hotel or wherever it was that we were staying, the tent one night that we were camping in, because that was the responsible thing to do.
And what a great Hanukkah memory.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
So I think it's as I said, nilmad v'naseh. We learn and then we do. And we apply our learning in the most meaningful, accessible way possible. I'm not going to, when I'm camping in the Australian outback in the middle of our summer,
light a candle.
Light candles.
Burn up the outback. No, that's good. That's what
it
was appreciated.
That's what God invented torches for.
That's exactly right. All right, now one more about Hanukkah, and that is the dreidel. So there's a spinning top, 4 sides of the dreidel. It's a game. It's played at this time of year. Why was it invented? What is it? Do you want to give us a little dreidel?
Again, and this will be the last one today,
Yeah.
I'm more than happy to, but you'll get all the instructions, including how to play what's called the dreidel game, with a great video on sharethelight.org.au. Just go down to Share the Resources and
Share
click
the-
on Games, and you'll see there's a beautiful image of the dreidel there, outlining the rules to the games of Hanukkah, as well as a great video from our friends at Bim Bam, who are great Jewish educators and activators, which has the... It's a wonderful game that has been brought into Jewish tradition. There's debates as to the sources, but most would say it's probably a Bavarian European game that's come into Jewish tradition. And it's a 4-sided spinning top that we use to tell the story of Hanukkah. Some say that there were 4 great armies that surrounded the Jewish people, and through the strength of the Maccabees, they just spun them round and round and round, and before they knew it, they fell over. Tells us the miracle of the story of the Maccabees. Others say it's just to remind us of the notion of miracles, and on each of the sides there is a different letter, Nes representing a 4-letter expression. Nes gadol haya sham, a great miracle happened there. And throughout the centuries, the dreidel with those 4 letters and that expression, a great miracle happened there, helped Jews living in diaspora who had become disconnected with the temple and with the land of Israel understand that this part of our heritage and history is very much connected to land and to narrative and to peoplehood. And what's one of the beautiful things that's happened in the last 75 years since the creation of the State of Israel and the return of Jewish populations and communities to that space to support the Jewish community that has been there throughout the centuries, because there's always been a community in the land, is the proliferation of dreidels, or in Hebrew sivivon, or sivivonim, that have on it different letters. Instead of saying Nes Gadol Haya Sham, a great miracle happened there, they replace the shin, the Hebrew letter shin, with the Hebrew letter pei, and it says Nes Gadol Haya Po, a great miracle happened here. And so every good dreidel collection or sivivon
Should have an
should
Israeli one.
have at least one Israeli one within that.
That's amazing. Well, now we've come to the segment that we're asking each of our guests something I like to call the 8 corny candle questions. So we're going to light it up. I'm going to get to the first question. Growing up, what was your favorite childhood Hanukkah memory?
Hanukkah wasn't a major part of my family's life growing up, particularly here in Australia, because very different to your experience. You know, Hanukkah's in the middle of winter, and it's dark and lighting and having, fried food and those sort of things. It's the middle of summer. I'm the youngest of 4 boys. We were out kicking the ball and playing cricket and until it got dark, and when it got dark, it was 10 o'clock already. But I have a wonderful memory of the fact that my parents have a gorgeous Hanukkah, which I believe they got as a wedding gift, which was formed and forged around the depiction of the menorah that stood in the temple. Obviously, it adds 2 more branches, and it's just a beautiful piece of Judaica, which wasn't brought out of the cabinet for 8 days of the year, but sat, on the mantle all year round as a representative of the fact that I was blessed to grow up in a very Jewish home that wasn't always necessarily very observant, but really valued our people's story and histories.
That's beautiful. And the number 1 Hanukkah food must have, why? What's your favorite Hanukkah food?
Well, Hanukkah's about oil, and fried food that has a lot of oil in it, is significant. My wife is very much dedicated to finding the world's best donut, but I've never been really carried away in that space. And so I make sure that at least once on Hanukkah every year, I have what I consider to be the world's best fried food, which is a deep fried Mars bar.
Oh, yum. Yeah. That's amazing. And is that something that you make yourself?
No, you haven't been in Australia long enough.
No, I guess not.
Every good, decent fish and chip shop in Melbourne. I'm not talking about the branded chains.
Yeah.
I'm talking about, mum and pop who came over from Greece after the war. They got it on the menu.
Right, deep fried Mars bar. I
Deep
got to
fried
look
Mars bar.
around.
Deep
That
fried
sounds
Mars bar.
amazing.
Frozen Mars bar.
I've had a deep fried Oreo, and that is
No,
amazing.
frozen Mars bar.
Frozen.
To be honest, if you get the fun size, it's probably more edible.
Yeah.
Dropped into essentially a pancake batter,
Yep.
and then dropped in next to the minimum chips.
Right. Okay. I must get on it, and maybe even create a gluten-free version for
Maybe.
my little tummy. Now, Hanukkah is spelled apparently 16 different ways. How do you spell Hanukkah, and why do you think it's spelled differently?
I'm dyslexic.
Okay. So you don't know how to spell Hanukkah. You pick any way you can.
I'll promise you, you've got it from Wikipedia. It was spelled in how many different ways?
16 apparently.
I promise you I've spelled it in at least 20 different ways.
Right.
Because spelling is not something I'm gifted in. I do know that there's different spellings, are different accents on different people's pronunciations of the Hebrew. And I'm just extraordinarily grateful that I have been gifted the opportunities to be comfortable in our people's native tongue. And so I will just refer to it as Chanukah, because it begins with a chet. I struggle with those who call it Hanukkah.
Right.
But I refer to it as Chanukah.
Excellent. Excellent.
But I can't spell that.
No, that's fine. Dreidel story. Tell us about your best dreidel story. That can be about playing a dreidel, buying a dreidel, singing a dreidel song. What do you like about the dreidel?
About 5 years ago here, someone called us up and said, I've got this box of 100 dreidels, wooden dreidels that are about 5 centimeters each, which I don't know how we got them, but we got them and we don't eat them. Would you like them at the synagogue? The type of thing that you'd give someone as a gift, you know. But when they arrived, I realized why he has 100 of them. Because they were made for you. In fact, not for you, probably for your little brother.
Okay.
I don't know if you have a little.
I have two little brothers.
For your little brothers, because these are these.
They're not so little, but yeah.
These white dreidels, 5 centimeters high with a little base that they sit in. That on one side had a baseball player swinging a bat,
Yeah.
the other side a basketball, the other side a gridiron, and the other side a soccer ball, and were, you know, every American boy's dream.
Right.
And I remember trying to give them as gifts here, and no
People
one
didn't get them.
No one wanted them. So my favorite dreidel story is taking these 100 dreidels out the back and spraying them silver over the pictures. And then having a great...
Getting rid of the American.
Making them a little less American. And then having a great Hanukkah activity here at Shul one year where people got Sharpies and got to decorate their own, practice their Hebrew writing of each of the letters on each of the sides.
That's great. That is great.
Because Australian
Very
kids
creative.
don't want an American dreidel. Never
No,
have,
fair
never
enough.
will.
Yeah, no, I've heard that before. Now, do you exchange gifts at Hanukkah, or are there any traditions that you have at Hanukkah time that are important to you?
We have some really significant traditions at Hanukkah time, and most of them are really about, as is this holiday so much for us, about sharing the light and joy and being a little silly at the end of a long year. And it's important for us too, because while it's not the end of the Jewish year, it's really the end of the quarter of the year that is so busy from a Jewish calendar
Yes.
and Jewish life perspective. And for someone who's busy through that, it's a lovely time for family. So we have a tradition at home that each year we purchase a new Chanukiah as we build what we think will grow into a remarkable collection. And there's a rotating order of who's purchasing which ones. The custom began when my daughter celebrated her first Hanukkah, and we commissioned a Chanukiah which had her name spelt out in those children's blocks, you know, with the letters on the side.
Yeah, beautiful.
The following year we did the same thing. My son had entered the world by Hanukkah of the following year. They're 18 months apart, but there was only one Hanukkah in between.
Yeah.
And
Well done.
and then the following year I bought a Hanukkah as a gift for my wife, and then the following year she bought me one, and so we got the order.
Yeah.
That's the order, and we've just played that out as to who
Your daughter, your son, you.
who chooses each year. So that's our one Hanukkah tradition. Our other one is my daughter and I love Christmas carols. We love singing loudly, and we love the fact that this time of year and other years you walk through shopping centres and people don't even know that they're walking through the shopping centre singing out loud.
Right.
And we love that. It's not the Christmas carols. We love that sense of just
Joy of singing. Yeah.
And so my daughter has put together a number of playlists. And if you go to music on sharethelight.org.au, you'll see that there are 2 Spotify playlists that are available for people to listen to Hanukkah music. And we drive around town blaring music, Hanukkah music, both modern and traditional, as loud as we can, and love the fact that people look at us like we're crazy.
That's fantastic.
It also means that for about 3 weeks a year, my son refuses to come with us in the car.
I don't know, you too. Is there any songs he likes? Maybe an Adam Sandler Hanukkah song? Or?
No.
No, nothing.
He doesn't like public embarrassment. He doesn't like having the attention drawn to him. I kind of got over that as a congregational rabbi, and my daughter has the same wiring. But my son's lovely, just not for him.
That is gorgeous. That is gorgeous. Now, thinking about Jewish holidays or festivals, and really I have a few more questions here, not including Hanukkah, what is your favorite holiday to celebrate and why?
I love Boxing Day
Okay.
because, as I said, I'm really blessed to have grown up in this gorgeous country. And Boxing Day for me is the end of the year. I look at my neighbors and my friends who are feeling the joy of family and community in many cases that I'm blessed through our far more filled Jewish year to feel those feelings, whether we're on the Shabbat table or the festival tables all year round, that sense of emotional, physical satiation, just being so satiated, satisfied. And so Boxing Day is great because I get that sense of, post-Jewish holiday felt by the whole nation.
Yeah.
And then we go to the cricket.
Yeah.
Because
That's what you do in Australia. You go to the Boxing Day
Because I grew
cricket.
up in Melbourne.
That's right.
And that's what we do.
That's right. And
And it's interesting because this year, the 26th of December is Shabbat. And the congregation will see me lead services and we'll finish very promptly. Because play starts at 11, the service will finish at 11:20, and I'll be there by 11:40.
sitting ready for the cricket, that's amazing.
I'll miss a couple of overs with my son.
That's amazing. Now, this is an outsider looking in question. If you were to celebrate a holiday or a festival from a different religion or culture, and you mentioned Boxing Day, and I suppose that is celebrated by everyone, would there be one that you'd be interested in learning about, or given this is or one that you've shared in already?
I love ritual.
Yeah.
I love ritual in every sense. I love civil ritual, and we spoke about the rituals that developed around sporting traditions and those sort of things. I love religious ritual. That brings meaning, and so I enjoy sharing moments with all sorts of communities, particularly when they're welcome and they're open. I find great meaning. I find great meaning in that. I also find great affirmation in my Jewish identity. When I go to Mass, and I have the uplifting experience of being. And this is just one Christian tradition, being surrounded by people in deep prayer with that collective singing and that sense of belonging and purpose. I feel so uplifted and so inspired. And when I choose not to take communion, I find that not to be like I'm ostracized or pushed out or not welcome. I find it to be an affirmation of my faith. I don't hold those beliefs. So in the middle of someone else's prayer experience, which they have welcomed me into, I'm able to affirm my beliefs. It's a wonderful book. I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to give you the author, but it really guides a lot of my multi-faith work. And I don't like the term interfaith, because it's more than just an interchange. More than just us and them. How to be a perfect stranger. And that's what I want to be. I like encountering the other I find something beautiful and sacred in encountering the other, and I want to do it respectfully. And I look for every single opportunity to do it.
It gives us such an opportunity to learn, and really that's what Sharing the Light is all about. You were the one who came up with this Share the Light festival, and it's a beautiful opportunity for us to not only demystify Judaism, bring people in, but also for us to find ways to look out. And I think that's a great book. I'm going to look up the author then, How to Be a Perfect Stranger. That sounds fantastic. What is something the audience doesn't know about Hanukkah that you can share? Like, if you were giving somebody a party tip.
Other than the rabbis made it up? Shh, don't tell anyone.
Actually, that's probably a good one.
What's a great Hanukkah tip? One of the great foods, other than deep fried Mars bars, is latkes, fried potato pancakes. A great Hanukkah tip is that latkes can actually be a 3-course meal. You make a really small latke, and you put a little smoked salmon on the top, and it's a lovely starter.
That is a starter.
You go into a more Asian, Japanese tradition, and you get your vegetable pancake with your sweet soy and your mayonnaise on top, and that's a main course. And then you bring it home with either a sweet pumpkin latke or an apple latke. And so that's my Hanukkah tip, that when you're looking to eat well, as long as you're not worried about cholesterol or calories,
or fat, or
latke in multiple forms can really be all the food you need through the whole festival.
Multicultural, multi-latkes, it's all happening. That's fantastic.
Everything and anything is possible.
Anything is possible. It's wonderful. Anything you'd like to say just to wrap us up, Rabbi?
Just to thank you, Jody. I think that you give me credit in saying that I came up with this idea, but you pursued it and led it as a lay leader of this community. And I think that there's a Brit Avodah on the door outside my office, which outlines the terms in which I am employed, and it begins and finishes with the expression that this is a sacred partnership, and the partnership between rabbi and community, and I'm privileged to share that partnership with you.
Well, I think we're very lucky to have you too, so thank you very much. And thank you for being here today. And I just have a little plug list, so you've mentioned sharethelight.org.au, and please check that out.
Link is on the bottom of your screen right now, correct, Edo?
Please look at it right now. And thank you also for being patient through all the drilling and everything. We have lights going on here.
We're sharing the light at the shul.
We're sharing the light at the shul.
Putting in energy-efficient, socially responsible lighting.
Which we're very proud of, very proud of. That was another grant. Join us each night of Hanukkah at 6:15 as we share the light with candle lighting, music, stories, and more from our community and beyond. Each day of Hanukkah, you can also collect free donuts through our drive-through donut here at TBI from 5 to 6.
5 to 6 every single day of Hanukkah, beginning on the 10th and continuing right through.
And that's anybody. They can just drive up, get a donut.
Hopefully it's everybody, not anybody, but yeah.
But what if we run out of donuts?
No such thing.
That is amazing.
We have, it's not one donut. Everyone that drives through is going to get half a dozen donuts in a bag.
So if you're here in St. Kilda, just drive through 5 through
Beyond
6.
that, fill the car, put the kids, the grandchildren, we're allowed to be there.
You're out of lockdown.
Out of lockdown, take a drive, come past. Well, unfortunately, we can't let you through the building. We can't do tours and that at the moment, but
we can give you food.
But we can feed
give you a donut.
And we can share the little miracle of Hanukkah.
That's amazing. And one more thing, and this again is also open to everyone. To be clear, join us on Friday, the 11th of December, for Hanukkah Funukkah, beginning at 5 p.m. with a BYO picnic and family activities at 6 p.m. There will be candle lighting, 6:15 a service. Registration is required, places are limited, and for that you go to the tbi.org.au to register. Is that correct?
Yeah, and if you're not able to join us because the registrations fill up, we do have density limits like all Victorians at the moment, who are, or at least those of us who are trying to do our part to be socially responsible. We will be streaming Hanukkah both through Share the Light and through tbi.org.au, the service, if you would like to see it. Particularly if you've never been to a service before, it's a lovely first opportunity to learning a little bit about how we do it.
One might even say it's Hanukkah.
Certainly is Hanukkah.
Hanukkah. Anyway, thank you again, and shalom.
Take care.